But I would have to say it was the biggest fight I've ever had with septoria in all my years of looking after crops. And the earlier sown the crop, the bigger the pressure. I know septoria rating is dropping, but I'd argue that I have a good bit of Costello still growing in the system, which would be ranked lower on septoria. And believe it or not, my Costello, because it was sown 3-4 weeks later, actually has less septoria in it than the grain.
As harvest gets underway for 2024, farmers are anxious to get some tonnes off the field during this mixed weather. Given the spend on crops, every tonne harvested is badly wanted. You are listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We'd really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and give us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm joined today by two farmers, James O'Reilly in Kilkenny and James Hegarty from Cork, to chat about the harvest to date and to get their impressions about the crops which are remaining to be harvested. James O'Reilly, I'm going to come to you first. James, how's your harvest working out so far?
Yeah, look, the winter barley, I suppose, like everybody, we had the good, the bad, and the ugly. Crops were ranging in yield from 3.2 to 4.2. We still have about 100 acres of winter barley to cut, but it's just not fit to cut. Our average to date, we're just below 3.7, but at highish moisture, 22% moisture and 66.8 kph. So the quality was good. But look, I wasn't expecting any record harvest with winter barley this year because it went in tough conditions. It sat in water all winter and sat in water all spring, and we know that barley doesn't like getting wet feet. And I feel the plants didn't tiller as well as we'd like. We've moved into winter oats there on Tuesday, and we've about 200 acres harvested in between the showers. And that was because, again, it was sown in marginal conditions in October and November. Again, there's some headlands that are poor. Look, if it averages 3.5, I'll be delighted. It's an early call yet. Again, early indications of kpH is anywhere from when the moisture is high, we're down to 52, and as the moisture drops to around 18%, or 54, 55. So again, the quality is fine, but just the poor headland here and there, or the wet valley in the middle of the field, look, they are pulling down your average yield. And I suppose when I'm adding up my yields, I take the full area of the field. I'm not discounting anything because I sold the whole field and I'm renting the whole field. So there's no point in fooling myself removing these areas from when I'm calculating my yield.
Sure. I suppose, look, it's always going to be a particularly tough year. And James Hegarty, down your side of the country, you're obviously started harvest as well. What's it looking like in Cork?
Similar story to James O'Reilly. I don't think we're going to hit the maximum yields. Won't be as high as his. We have a range so far of the bad would be 2.5 and we're up to 3.5. But again, it is headlands and hollows in the field and poor areas that are dragging down the yield. Quality is very nice, lovely grain fill, but it's just the thin areas and the blank areas are really letting it down. We've had a range of moistures, like cutting today or yesterday now 17.5, ranging up to 21. But that's kind of the go on to winter barley. We've very little baled yet, but done a bit of baling yesterday. Straw yields will be back a little bit, all right, on the winter barley.
Okay, and have you got in, James, into any oats so far?
We have no oats ripe yet, Michael. It will be another bit, but oats is looking very promising. It is the one crop that I've high hopes for. Look, bearing in mind, like a member of my discussion group gave me figures. We had just shy of 1,600 mil of rain last year. So, crops were the winter barley was sown there in the back end, and it doesn't particularly like water. Oats seems to thrive. So oats is the one bright spark. Winter wheat is looking promising as well.
I was going to ask you that question, James, about winter wheat in terms of, a lot of it looks reasonably good, but there's lots of concerns around disease control. What's your impressions down in Cork around that?
I'm happy enough with disease control. We went with down where I am, you can't take half measures on disease control. We had a very robust fungicide program. So I'm happy enough with the control of septoria. Some of it was quite later sown because we sow after forage maize, which we sell on contract. So I suppose the later sowing helped as well. So I'm optimistic enough about winter wheat.
Okay. And James O'Reilly, can I ask you about your winter wheat? I know you have a good bit sown. I know earlier in the year you were you were, I suppose, talking about you had a very much a range of wheat sown early, and you kept going as late on as you could, and so you have a great spread on it. What's your impression of your wheat on one side of it and disease control, I suppose, maybe on the other side of it?
Yeah, look, it's the one crop that I'm hanging my hat on this year that I'm hoping that it performs well. But I would have to say it was the biggest fight I've ever had with Septoria in all my years of looking after crops. Um, and the earlier sown the crop, the bigger the pressure. Um, and the variety grain. I know Septoria rating is dropping, but I'd argue that I have a good bit of Costello still growing in the system, which would be ranked lower on Septoria. And believe it or not, my Costello, because it was sown 3-4 weeks later, um, actually has less Septoria in it than the grain. But I think we've had ideal grain filling period over the last 6 weeks of that. There's never been overly hot temperatures, plenty of moisture, and I think there is enough sun there to help fill the head. And just a comment on straw yield. I've no straw baled yet. We're hoping that we might get at it this evening or tomorrow if the weather holds, but we can't seem to get 3 days together to try save straw. So that's a challenge, and I think that'll have a bigger impact on straw yield than anything like last year. Just when you're on about straw yield, what decimated my straw yield was the fact that straw sat on the ground for 6 weeks, and we ran it through tethers, I'd say 3 times, and rode it up. And every time you put straw through a machine, you do knock the yield of straw out of it. But I think that's if we get the weather to save what straw is there, there'll be plenty of straw. And if we get nasty weather like we got last year, well, there's going to be a straw deficit.
Okay. I suppose, look, I suppose we can't mention straw without a bit of a debacle that was kind of went on over the last week or 10 days. James Hegarty, what's your impression of that? I know it's been a very tough, in terms of frustration for farmers all around in terms of the uncertainty about what to do and what not to do. Has it come back around in circle again? Is it better or worse, or what you're thinking?
Well, it's been an eventful week. As of yesterday, the straw chopping scheme is back, but I talking to my neighbours and fellow tillage farmers, we feel very betrayed by the minister, really, like, to just pull the rug from under us just as the harvest started. And his rationale for doing it was questionable, if you ask me, because like fodder, the vast majority of the straw around here is going for bedding. So I don't know how big an impact it would have on the fodder market. But we sat spring oats there in the spring, late sown oats, just happy to get it sown, knowing that we'd have a chopping scheme and that we continue our rotation and get in winter wheat hassle free. Like the last few days, then we were kind of faced with the notion of, do we try and bale this crop, or do we just suffer the loss of the chopping and carry on and plow it in anyway without a scheme? So it was really, really disgusting from the minister, is all I can describe it.
James O'Reilly, just to come back to you, and obviously I presume you'll echo the frustration of James Hegarty there as well, but just in terms of your overall farming system, I would presume you had a lot in for SIM, and you might just describe within your farming system how important or not, maybe as the case may be, that straw incorporation, how you would see it in your farming system.
Yeah, look, I'm farming here. My parents have herd numbers. I have a herd number. My wife is farming. So, and then we've two share farmers that we have the option to chop over 700 acres of straw, and we have maxed out every one of them. We picked the lower yielding straws. Let's call it spade a spade. Your economics will rule what you chop and don't chop. There's a fair share of oats in that, and it's been a vital scheme. The SIMs put money back in tillage farmers' pockets directly, because a lot of us were chopping a certain amount of these straws, regardless of the straw chopping scheme ever before. Like my father, back when straw was making very small money, he used to chop every acre of land that we had here for a number of years. And from an organic matter point of view, it's great for the soil. I think it's probably one of the most sustainable environmental schemes that was ever invented, because there is literally practically no environmental cost in carrying out the scheme, and you're putting the straw back in the land that needs it. From an environmental point of view, with the current level of SIMS applications that were there, it had the potential to sequester 63,000 tons of carbon dioxide this year, which is massive, given the fact that it's done on a small area of land, and it doesn't actually reduce agricultural output in the process of doing that. Quite often, an environmental scheme will have the negative effect of reducing output, whereas the long-term effects of chopping straw should actually increase agricultural output. Like Chagas, from your own research and whatnot, he published data recently with Tirlon, where you showed that the winter oats production, when you chop the straw, is carbon neutral. When you chop the straw with winter wheat, it reduces the carbon footprint by 77%, which again is massive. And I know tillage has a really good environmental footprint, but obviously we can do better. And the straw chopping scheme was affording us to be able to do just that. So to be able to sequester carbon with the incorporation the measure has a similar cost ratio to afforestation. But with SIMS, it's much easier to achieve the targets that they set out there. Whereas we're falling behind from a national point of view with afforestation. So SIMS and the straw chopping was helping agriculture achieve its environmental targets that were set out in the Climate Action Plan. So I'm baffled why the minister would have touched a functioning market and a functioning system. And now that he's bought out, he'll pay you if you take it out of the scheme. He'll pay you a reduced rate. I think it's going to undermine the scheme next year, because you're going to have a lot of farmers that will be saying, well, geez, I'll put in for chopping and for hope that the minister might pay us to bail it. And then those of us that were relying on the scheme up to now may not be able to chop or the full allocation, that will all be on a reduced basis because the scheme will be oversubscribed. So I think it was a brilliant scheme brought in by the Department of Ag. And there was a massive uptake by tillage farmers, and I just hope that they haven't destroyed the scheme going forward by the mess that the minister created in the last week.
And James, as you're talking there, just because the minister was pretty clear that it was around forage, and that was the reason for the change that he wanted to bring in, and to a degree you can see there's some degree of worry in that side of the house as well. In terms of the markets that you would have had in selling straw, how much of that would have ever traditionally ended up maybe in for feed or forage for animals?
Yeah, look, I do supply a lot of straw into the diet feeder market. It's a roughage in the diet feeding market, so a lot of wheat and oat straw would end up there in a chopped bale for the diet feeder market. But for the minister to suggest that there was a fodder crisis in 2018 or 19, in that drought year, I got plenty of calls from farmers asking, would I sell whole crop? I have nobody ringing me asking me, would I sell a field of wheat for a whole crop? If you look at the acreage of maize, I think it's increased by about 20% this year. So there's a lot of forage, and same with beet. There's a lot more fodder crops in the ground this year. Okay, grass growth wasn't ideal. Fodder reserves or silage reserves are a little bit back in last year, but there is plenty of fodder there at the minute. There's nothing to suggest that there's a fodder crisis. And again, as I said to you, I think the weather from now to the end of harvest will impact more on the availability of straw than whether we have a straw chopping scheme or not. And if I don't get good enough weather, even the straw that I'm hoping to sell into the forage market won't be good enough. They'll have to find an alternative fibre source. Because obviously if straw sits in the ground for 5 or 6 weeks, there's a risk that you could pick up mycotoxins and different things, and that can play havoc with the ruminant animals. So I think he got this one wrong. I don't know who was in his ear telling him there was a fodder crisis, but there's certainly not one in County Kilkenny.
Okay, and James, just talking about Kilkenny and switching back down to Cork, James, you mentioned, I think earlier, that you sell a bit of maize on contract. But in terms of the straw, and to ask you a similar question to James O'Reilly, in terms of straw that you sell, how big a proportion of that do you think actually ends up ultimately as forage in any given year?
I would agree with most of what James O'Reilly has said there. And look, we sell a certain amount of it. Big square bales of wheat and straw would be going to the diet feeder market for roughage. Now, look, last year, guys were able to reduce dramatically because straw was tight again and they got on without it. But huge amount of straw down here is for the bedding market. Like I would say, all the barley straw is for bedding in general. Just going on the contract growing, we increased our maize area this year by 50% because of demand for, we're in a real dairy area, and that had knock-on effects on the increased maize area has big knock-on effects on the availability of straw as well. My view on the whole thing, farming has gone out of balance. The slipping in the tillage area is starting to have knock-on effects. Now we all need each other. And like, there isn't enough being done to maintain the tillage area. That's my view. Like, I'm firmly of the view down here, like that the dairy sector and the livestock sector are my bread and butter. We market all our own grain here directly into the livestock sector, but the thing is going out of balance now. We need a critical mass of tillage area for everybody, to survive. And the drop in the tillage area now is having these knock-on effects.
Out of that, the lot of straw that's in the straw shop scheme is not fit for the forage market anyway. Like oilseed rape,
Absolutely, yeah.
the spring oats, the late sown spring oats, that'll never be fucking fit to bale because you're going to be harvesting it in September. Days are short. You'll be damn glad to chop it and put it back into the soil. But that's not fit for the diet feeder market. So let's have a look to see that there was very little barley in there. That's the bedding market. And there was a share of wheat. But again, it's the poor, thinner crops that would have been put into the scheme. So I don't see it making a big difference to the fodder market. And again, as James Hegarty said, like last year, farmers cut back their usage of straw because it just wasn't there. It didn't bale up. And there was a lot of straw that I couldn't sell into the diet feeder market because it just wasn't good enough. It wasn't fit for purpose, in my opinion. And I didn't want farmers coming back to me claiming that the cows aborting calves and different things. So the weather will have a bigger impact on the forage market or the straw forage market. And bear in mind, it's only a fibre source. There is alternative fibres out there. So to tamper with a scheme that was providing great environmental benefits, public good, it was improving soil health, it was putting organic matter back in the tillage soils that desperately needed in comparison to exporting every ounce of organic material that we produce and sell it. It was a win-win. It was probably the most successful environmental scheme that the department have ever come up with, and the adoption rate was massive. And I feel now by doing what they've done, it could jeopardise the effectiveness of the scheme going forward.
And James, and I'm going to ask you this question, a final question to both of you. But James, as you were talking, I'll go to you first. And I think your concerns are valid in terms of other people maybe jumping into it just in case they might get a bit, if you like, the baling element of it. How are you, or what reassurance would you need from the department or the minister when you're doing up your figures for the 2025 crop around the straw chopping?
Yeah, I think it needs to come out because I'm planning now for next year's crop. Like, we'll be cultivating land fairly shortly, and we'll be planning autumn plantings. So I'd love if the minister came out and said, look, that was a 5-year scheme. He originally put 50 million for the 5 years, and he has contributed extra money last year to it. And now he's taking money from the exchequer to tempt lads to take straw out of the chopping. And I suppose I would plead with farmers, unless you have a market for that straw, leave the straw in the chopping. And because even though you're getting €250 a hectare, you're also getting the benefits of the P's and K's into your soil. But I think the minister needs to come out and affirm that he's not going to touch the scheme next year, that it's going to be there for the remainder of the 5 years that he promised us day one.
Thanks, James. And James Hegarty, what's your thinking? Obviously, as James is saying there,
I'm thinking the same, actually. Like, he has to come out and he has to be very clear that he is behind this scheme, and that there isn't going to be a repeat of this. Like, I fear the minister has actually increased the price of straw nationally, because, like, look, there's a lot. I know that the baling thing is there now, but there's a lot of farmers now who are kind of civic minded, for want of a better word, and they didn't put a lot of straw in because they said, look, it's wanted, my neighbours need it, and now they're going to feel aggrieved that they're not going to get the 175 that the guy down the road was getting. Like we've had political interference in a functioning market, and it always has knock-on effects. Like, so he needs to be very clear that he is not touching the scheme and that he is behind it. He needs to come out and say that.
Or any other schemes. Like, I mean, it's not if he got away with tampering with this scheme, no scheme is sacred. Farmers have no security, and whether that's a tillage farmer, dairy farmer, beef farmer, he's done a serious harm to our confidence in the schemes, and he needs to restore that. And that doesn't matter what the sector of farming you're in. It was Beggar's belief that somebody could tamper with a scheme on the 11th second before. Like, I had feels a straw chopped when he proposed the removal of the scheme. Let's be clear, he never actually removed the scheme. He was proposing to remove the scheme, and now he's come up with a compromise. But
look, James, I can certainly hear your frustration, and I certainly hear your call for clarity in all of those schemes. But look, that's as much as we have time for today. I'm conscious as well that you're probably ready to get up into your combine relatively shortly, because it's a pretty nice day out there and there's a bit of rain coming tonight. So James O'Reilly and James Hegarty, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate you chatting to me today.
Thank you very much, Michael.
That's it for the show this week. My thanks to James O'Reilly and James Hegarty for joining me. If you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.